In the sweltering heat of a Greek summer, in 480 BC, the narrow pass of Thermopylae became the stage for a glorious last stand. Led by the formidable King Leonidas of Sparta, a small band of 300 Spartans, alongside their few thousand Greek allies, prepared to face the overwhelming might of King Xerxes. With the odds against them, the Greek warriors harnessed the strategic advantage of the constricted terrain, holding off the vast Persian forces for 3 grueling days. Hello, welcome to the channel. If you are new here, it's good to meet you. If you are coming back, it's good to have you back with me. As always, if you like what I do, enjoy the content, then there's a link to the Patreon in the description. Otherwise, help me reach my subscriber goal of 10,000 subs by clicking that button and liking the video. That seems to help YouTube push it out a bit more. And now, without any further delay, I'd like you to get relaxed and we can begin our history of the Battle of Thermopylae. In the late 6th century BC, the burgeoning Persian Empire under Darius I faced internal challenges and rebellions, particularly from its Greek-speaking territories. Darius, having ascended to power by quelling numerous insurrections, was keenly aware of the threats to his empire's stability. The Ionian Revolt, which erupted in 499 BC and persisted until 494 BC, was one such threat, drawing in support from the city-states of Athens and Eretria. This revolt marked a critical juncture for Darius's reign and showed the vulnerability of Persian control over its Greek subjects, igniting his determination to reinforce Persian dominance. Darius was thus intent on asserting his supremacy and viewed the suppression of the revolt not just as a punitive action, but as a strategic opportunity to once again extend Persian influence over the tumultuous regions of Greece. His commitment to punish both Athens and Eretria stemmed from their pivotal roles in supporting the Ionian rebels, an involvement that he perceived as an unforgivable betrayal, and one that could not go unchecked nor unpunished. To set the stage for a broader conquest, Darius initiated a military campaign in 492, led by his more than capable general Mardonius. This expedition aimed not just to reassert control over Thrace, but also to integrate Macedon more tightly as a client kingdom, thereby securing a Persian foothold in the northern approaches to Greece. Thus, in 491, as part of his strategy to solidify control over Greece as a whole, Darius dispatched emissaries to demand symbolic gifts of earth and water from them, signifying their submission to his rule. This request followed his recent military successes, which had effectively demonstrated Persian power. While many Greek states complied with Darius's demand, whether by fear or financial coercion, Athens and Sparta defiantly executed the Persian ambassadors, a bold statement of refusal that escalated tensions into open conflict. Sparta attempted to mitigate this diplomatic disaster by sending 2 of its own citizens to Persia for execution, hoping to atone for the affront. Nevertheless, these actions signaled a clear commitment from Athens and Sparta to resist Persian domination, marking a critical point of defiance against Darius's expansionist policies. In response, Darius intensified his military campaigns. In 490, he tasked Datis and Artaphernes with leading a formidable amphibious force against Greece. This force first secured a victory over Naxos and subdued the other Cycladic islands before moving to Eretria, which they besieged and destroyed. The expedition culminated in a landing at Marathon, where the Persian army was unexpectedly defeated by the vastly outnumbered Athenians. This significant defeat forced the Persian forces to retreat, marking a temporary setback to Darius's plans. However, undeterred, Darius began preparations for an even larger invasion to subjugate Greece once and for all. But a revolt in Egypt in 486 diverted his attention, and thus his resources. The invasion of Greece would have to wait. It was not long before Darius passed away in 485 BC, leaving the task of quelling the Egyptian revolt, and of course continuing the campaign against Greece, to his son, Xerxes. Thus, Xerxes quickly suppressed the Egyptian rebellion and resumed preparation for the invasion of Greece. He ordered monumental engineering feats, including the bridging of the Hellespont and the construction of a canal across the isthmus of Mount Athos, to facilitate the movement of his massive army. By 480, Xerxes' preparations were complete, and his army crossed into Europe, ready for a confrontation. Meanwhile, the threat of a Persian invasion had galvanized the Greek city-states into action. Led by Athens and inspired by the strategic foresight of Themistocles, the Greeks had been fortifying their defenses and building a powerful fleet of triremes. Recognizing their inability to confront the Persians alone, the Athenians sought alliances with the other city-states. In 481, as Xerxes' expedition loomed, a pan-Hellenic congress was convened at Corinth, uniting various Greek states in a rare show of unity. The congress, which continued into 480 BC, devised a strategic plan to confront the Persian threat directly. They decided to block the pass of Thermopylae on land and the straits of Artemisium at sea, creating a choke point to neutralize the numerical advantage of the Persian forces. However, the Greeks were also prepared for the worst. Plans were also made for a strategic withdrawal to the Isthmus of Corinth, and arrangements were made for the evacuation of Athenian women and children to Troezen in the Peloponnese, should the initial defenses fail. As the Persians made their slow advance through Thrace and Macedon, news of their approach eventually reached the Greek states in August via a Greek informant. At that time, the Spartans, recognized as the military leaders of the Greek alliance, were engaged in the sacred festival of Carnea, during which military action was traditionally prohibited. This religious observance had previously delayed Spartan participation at the Battle of Marathon. Additionally, the Olympic Games were underway, marked by the Olympic truce, further complicating any military response from the entire Spartan army. Recognizing the gravity of the Persian threat, Spartan authorities deemed it urgent enough to dispatch an advance force to block the Persian advance at the strategic pass of Thermopylae. Commanded by the Spartan king Leonidas I, this force included the 300 elite members of the royal guard, the Hippeis, chosen for the mission due to their critical role as bodyguards. Leonidas' objective was to rally additional Greek forces along the route and hold the pass until the full Spartan army could be mobilized. Herodotus's narratives of these events highlight a consultation with the oracle at Delphi, which prophesied ominously, "O ye men who dwell in the streets of broad Lacedaemon, either your glorious town shall be sacked by the children of Perseus, or, in exchange, must all through the whole Laconian country mourn for the loss of a king, a descendant of great Heracles." Interpreting this as a prediction of his own demise and the dire situation facing his forces, Leonidas deliberately selected warriors who had sons to ensure the continuation of their lineages. As Leonidas and the Spartans journeyed to Thermopylae, they were joined by contingents from various Greek city-states, and eventually, by the time they reached the pass, their numbers had swelled to over 7,000 men. The strategic choice of the middle gate for their stand, a narrow section of the pass previously fortified by the Phocians, illustrated Leonidas's tactical acumen. Additionally, to safeguard against a potential flanking maneuver along a mountain track revealed by the locals of Trachis, Leonidas positioned 1,000 Phocian warriors to guard it. By mid-August, the Persian army appeared across the Malian Gulf, prompting a critical war council among the Greek forces. While some Peloponnesian contingents advocated a retreat to a more defensible isthmus of Corinth, local Phocians and Locrians, driven by a sense of immediate threat to their homelands, argued for standing firm at Thermopylae and called for additional reinforcements. Leonidas, demonstrating calm leadership among all these rising tensions, resolved to hold the pass. In a dramatic parley, a Persian emissary was sent and offered Leonidas and his men admittedly generous terms in exchange for their surrender, including land and titles, if not just for their submission and laying down of their weapons. Leonidas's defiant reply, "Come and take them," marked his resolute refusal to yield. The messenger went back to the Persian side and gave them the news. After a 4-day standoff, during which Xerxes awaited for the Greeks to disperse, the Persian king ordered his forces to finally attack, and the legendary Battle of Thermopylae would finally begin. The count of soldiers Xerxes amassed for his second invasion has been widely debated, with ancient sources suggesting extraordinarily high numbers, and modern scholars proposing much lower and realistic estimates. Herodotus, The ancient historian claimed a staggering total of 2.6 million military personnel, with an equal number of support staff. This number is frankly ridiculous. But Simonides, a contemporary poet, even suggested up to 4 million, while Xerxes provided a more conservative figure, at least comparatively, of around 800,000. These numbers are generally thought to be complete fabrications, blown out of the proportion, as Herodotus' works often are. Now, contrastingly, the modern scholarship offers a more skeptical view of these ancient claims. It generally estimates the Persian forces to range between 120 or, on the high end of things, 300,000. And this skepticism is mainly rooted in considerations of the logistical capabilities of the time, the practical limits on Persian bases, and, in general, the broader manpower constraints. These contemporary estimates emphasize a more realistic assessment of what was logistically feasible for such a vast ancient army. Regardless of the exact number, it is widely accepted that Xerxes' strategy centered on assembling a force that was so large, so intimidating, that it would ensure the overwhelming success of the Persian campaign, both on land and at sea. And in fact, most of the time when the adversaries would see or hear of such a formidable force, they would simply lay down their weapons. But of course, not the Spartans and the Athenians, at least not this time. While the uncertainty extends to the specifics of troop deployment at key battle sites like Thermopylae, and it remains unclear if Xerxes deployed his entire force at the pass, or if significant contingents were left to maintain control in Macedon and Thessaly. According to Pausanias, who possibly drew upon Herodotus for his information, the local Locrians, situated directly in the path of the Persian advance, contributed all of their available warriors, and this amounted to about 6,000 men. This figure, combined with the 5,200 that Herodotus records, suggests a Greek force at Thermopylae of around 11,200, although modern historians generally consider Herodotus' account more credible and calculate about 7,000 Greek soldiers by adding 1,000 Lacedaemonians and 900 Helots to Herodotus' total. The Helots, by the way, were the underclass in Sparta, the ones who would do all the dirty jobs, the farming, the crafting, all that sort of thing, while the Spartans were busy preparing themselves for war. Other sources like Diodorus and additional accounts from Pausanias are often overlooked in these modern recalculations. Moreover, as the battle actually progressed, the Greek contingent was reduced to around 3,000 men, and that included the 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, and up to 900 Helots, and 1,000 Phocians guarding the heights, adjusted for casualties over the course of the conflict. Now, by choosing to defend Thermopylae, the hot gates in our tongue, the Greeks strategically utilized their strengths optimally, aligning with their defensive military doctrine. The narrow pass was an ideal terrain that minimized the numerical advantage of the Persians, allowing the Greeks to hold off a much larger force without needing to engage in outright battle. This defensive position was crucial, as it hindered the Persian advance into Greece, giving the Greeks time to strengthen their positions and gather more forces. The formidable phalanx formation was really to thank for this, forming up with side to side, shoulder to shoulder with their friends. They would have their spears out the front, making this kind of porcupine that the Persians had no choice but to charge into. Well, the phalanx was essentially the nuclear bomb of the ancient world. Very difficult to go up against, unless the other people had phalanxes too, which if it was Greeks versus Greeks they usually did, and then it would simply become a pushing match, like the start of a rugby game. Now, the geography of Thermopylae itself played a significant role in the tactics employed. The pass, known for its narrowness, was perfectly suited for this formation, and this formation did effectively block the passage. Very tricky to get past it, especially in such a constricted space. Most of the time, if you wanted to beat the phalanx formation, you had to flank it from the side. Well, to the sides of the Spartan phalanx was a wall of solid rock. Very hard to flank around that. Well, because of this, the Persian cavalry, which was an essential component of their military might, was rendered almost useless in such terrain, and the lightly armored Persian infantry couldn't easily outmaneuver the heavily armored Greeks. A critical vulnerability for the Greeks, however, was an alternative mountain path that could potentially allow the Persians to outflank them, and Leonidas was very much aware of this, so he stationed those Phocian troops to guard the path, showing a keen awareness of the terrain and potential tactical movements by the enemy. But as long as nobody told them about the pass, maybe they'd be all right. Yes, foreshadowing. The pass at the time was said to be so narrow that only a single chariot could pass through, bordered by the Malian Gulf on one side, making it a choke point against the massive Persian army. Herodotus mentions that the Phocians had enhanced this natural barrier by creating a marsh, further narrowing the passage with a causeway that only allowed limited movement, ideal for defense, but a complete nightmare for an attacking force. The surrounding landscape was rugged, marked by sparse vegetation and steep hills, presenting a harsh environment, very unwelcoming for the equally unwelcome Persians, who were simply not accustomed to such terrain, despite their homeland being very mountainous. The strategic selection of this battleground by Leonidas and his men showcased their tactical acumen, as they positioned themselves in a locale where natural elements were just as much a part of their defense as their spears and shields. Over time, sedimentation in the Malian Gulf has shifted the landscape significantly, moving the shoreline away from the original site of the battle. And today the site is inland, with modern roads running near where the ancient warriors clashed. And by the way, even in the Second World War, the historical resonance of Thermopylae's tactical significance was echoed when the British Commonwealth forces made a stand against the Germans, not far from where Leonidas and his Spartans fought so bravely. On the initial day of combat at Thermopylae, Xerxes growing impatient after the 5-day standoff, set out to engage the Greek forces. He first commanded his 5,000 archers to unleash a formidable volley of arrows towards the Greeks. However, these arrows failed to inflict any significant damage, as they were launched from a distance of about 100 yards away, allowing the Greek shields and helmets, crafted from wood and sometimes reinforced with bronze, to effectively deflect them. Following the ineffective archery volley, Xerxes escalated his efforts by deploying 10,000 troops from the Medes and Cesians to capture the Greeks and bring them to him. The Persian soldiers advanced in successive waves on and on against the Greek position, each wave consisting of roughly 10,000 men. The Greeks had strategically positioned themselves in front of the Phocian wall at the narrowest section of the pass. It was this narrow passage that enabled them to maximize their defensive stance of a phalanx while utilizing a minimal number of soldiers. The details of the Greek tactical formation during these assaults are not extensively documented, but accounts that we have do suggest that they adopted that typical phalanx formation, and it certainly makes sense that they would have used this formidable wall of overlapping shields and protruding spear points, effectively blocking the pass. That being said, it's also quite an intimidating thing to charge into, especially with the man behind you pushing you forward. You must feel sorry for the Persians a little bit, just following orders. The arrangement was, of course, completely advantageous against them, because the Persian shields were less robust and their weapons were shorter, making it difficult for them to engage the heavily armored Greek hoplites effectively. Herodotus notes that the Greek units from various cities fought as distinct groups and were periodically rotated to keep the defenders fresh, indicating that the Greeks likely had more troops at their disposal than were strictly necessary to hold the pass. Well, it was this fierce resistance offered by the Greeks inflicted heavy casualties on the Medes, to the extent that Xerxes reportedly rose from his seat 3 times in anger, agitated by the sight of seeing his troops being continuously decimated. Unsatisfied with the performance of his troops, to say the least, Xerxes sent his elite corps, the Immortals, consisting of 10,000 highly trained soldiers, into the fray in a second assault on the same day. However, even the Immortals, the crack troops of the Persian army, were unable to breach the Greek defenses, and they, just like the Medes, suffered heavy losses. According to some historical accounts, the Spartans employed a tactical maneuver of feigning retreat, which enticed the Persians to break ranks and pursue them. And when the Persians did so, the Greeks would turn and strike them down, exploiting the disorder and fear within the Persian ranks. On the subsequent day of the Battle of Thermopylae, Xerxes launched another infantry assault, operating under the assumption that the Greek defenders, few in number, certainly must have been significantly weakened by yesterday's combat and injuries. Surely. Well, despite his expectations, the Persian forces found no greater success on this second day than they had found on the first. And, they encountered the very same resilient defense that had thwarted them the previous day. Well, Xerxes was completely baffled and reportedly quite furious. You can't really blame him about the outcomes of the continuous frontal attacks, constantly having to watch on from a distance as all of his men would be brutally slaughtered. Thus, he withdrew his forces to the encampment, deeply troubled by the situation, and tried to think about what to do next. In a rather fortuitous turn of events for the Persians, later that same day, Xerxes received critical intelligence from an unlikely source, a local Greek from Trachis named Ephialtes, who, driven by the prospect of a reward, betrayed the Greeks. He informed Xerxes of an alternative route that would allow the Persian forces to circumvent the pass at Thermopylae by traversing a mountain path. Thus, the name Ephialtes would forever be etched in Greek history as synonymous with betrayal, becoming a byword for nightmare and the epitome of treachery in Greek culture. Seizing on this newfound opportunity, Xerxes tasked his commander, Hydarnes, with leading the elite Persian unit of the Immortals, although their exact composition following the initial day's losses remains unclear. Herodotus does not specify the details of the troops under Hydarnes' command on the mission, suggesting that while the Immortals had suffered earlier, they may have been reinforced with additional troops for this maneuver especially. According to some historical accounts, such as that of Diodorus, Hydarnes was at the helm of a significant force, perhaps numbering up to 20,000 men, tasked with this strategic flanking mission. The route disclosed by Ephialtes began east of the Persian encampment and followed the ridge of Mount Anopeia, skirting behind the cliffs that lined the pass. This path diverged in two directions, one leading towards Phocis, and the other descending to the Malian Gulf at the Alpenus, the first locality within the region of Locris. At the crack of dawn on the third day, the Phocians stationed on the mountain path were startled into action by the noise of rustling oak leaves, signaling the approach of the Persian forces led by Hydarnes. Herodotus recounts their astonishment upon discovering the enemy's approach, a sentiment mirrored by Hydarnes, who initially mistook them for Spartans. Informed by the traitor Ephialtes that they were actually Phocians, not the feared Spartans, Hydarnes chose not to engage them in direct battle. Instead, the Persians simply launched a volley of arrows towards the Phocians, who retreated to a nearby hill to make their stand, mistakenly thinking that the Persians intended to attack them directly. The Persian contingent, however, did not linger, continuing their march to encircle the main Greek forces at the pass, all while the Phocians looked on helplessly. As the day unfolded, Leonidas received the dire news through a runner. The path had been compromised, and the Phocians had failed to hold their position. Convening a council of war at dawn, informed by the Greek Tyrhastiadas of the imminent peril, a debate ensued among the Greek commanders. While some were advocating a retreat, Leonidas, perhaps remembering the words of the oracle, resolved to hold their ground at the narrow pass. He gallantly offered his allies the choice to withdraw, a proposal that many accepted. However, approximately 2,000 warriors chose to remain, all prepared to bravely face their fate alongside the gallant Spartans. Among those who did remain were 700 Thespians, staunchly led by General Demophilus, who refused to abandon the fight, and 400 Thebans, along with likely the Spartan helots. These troops chose to confront the Persians in the open field, fully aware of the grim outcome that awaited them. Leonidas's decision to stand his ground has to this very day been extensively analyzed and, in turn, admired throughout history. It's often highlighted that the Spartans, bound by their rigid laws, did not entertain the idea of retreat. This incident reinforced the storied perceptions that Spartans never fled from battle. Moreover, Leonidas, perhaps mindful of the Delphic oracle's prophecy, might have seen this as his last stand and a necessary sacrifice to ensure Sparta's survival. One prevailing theory suggests that Leonidas' final stand was a strategic sacrifice to protect his retreating allies. By holding the pass as long as possible, he provided a critical window for other Greek contingents to escape, thus avoiding a much worse massacre on open terrain where Persian cavalry could easily dominate and run them down. This rearguard action by Leonidas not only allowed the 3,000 Greeks to survive, but ensured they would live to fight another day, continuing the resistance against the invading Persians. The participation of the Thebans at Thermopylae has stirred considerable debate. Herodotus intimates that they were essentially coerced into battle, held as hostages to secure the allegiance of Thebes to the Greek cause. Contrarily, Plutarch disputes this, suggesting that if they were truly hostages, they would have been dismissed with the other Greek forces when the situation became too dire. More likely, those present were Theban loyalists, who opposed the Persian rule and chose willingly to fight at Thermopylae, knowing well that returning to a Thebes dominated by Persia was not an option if Boeotia fell. The Thespians, on the other hand, demonstrated extraordinary commitment to the battle, embodying a spirit of self-sacrifice that is often overlooked. Despite the complete evacuation of their city, they chose to stay and fight, representing every hoplite that Thespia could muster. And this act of defiance was not unique in Thespian history. On at least 2 other historical occasions, Thespian forces similarly committed themselves to fight to the death. So when we remember the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, perhaps we better remember them too. As the battle resumed at dawn, Xerxes delayed his assault, making libations and waiting for his elite troops, the Immortals, to descend from the mountain path. The Persian king then unleashed a frontal assault with 10,000 men, charging the Greek line that now extended beyond the narrow pass to engage the enemy head-on in a wider area, maximizing the carnage inflicted upon the Persian forces. The Greeks initially fought with spears, until these were all shattered. Then continued the battle with short swords. In the thick of the battle, several high-ranking Persians fell, including two of Xerxes' brothers. The Spartan king Leonidas was also eventually killed, and a fierce skirmish ensued over his bodies, which the Greeks ultimately secured. As the Immortals advanced, the remaining Greek forces retreated to a nearby hill behind the defensive wall. The Thebans, in a desperate bid for survival, broke away from their Greek allies and surrendered to the Persians, though not without sustaining casualties before their capitulation was accepted. Xerxes, frustrated and eager to finally end the standoff, commanded that the wall be dismantled. He then surrounded the hill and ordered that his archers to eliminate the last of the Greek defenders. Archaeological evidence supports the fierce nature of this final stand, with numerous Persian arrowheads discovered at the site, indicating a relentless and savage barrage against the Greeks. Ultimately, the Persian forces were victorious, albeit with heavy losses, estimated by Herodotus to be as high as 20,000 Persian deaths. The Greek rear guard was effectively annihilated, with a total Greek loss, including the battles over the previous days, estimated to be around 2,000. In the aftermath of the Persian withdrawal from Thermopylae, the Greeks solemnly gathered the bodies of the fallen and interred them on the hillside where they had fought so valiantly. In recognition of their heroic stand, a stone lion was erected on the site to commemorate King Leonidas of Sparta, symbolizing his bravery and the sacrifice of his men. With the path through Thermopylae now cleared, the Greek naval position at Artemisium became untenable. Although the naval skirmishes there had ended without a decisive victor, the Greek fleet withdrew in an orderly fashion back to the Saronic Gulf. There, they played a crucial role in transporting Athenian civilians to safety on the island of Salamis, away from the advancing Persian forces. As for the Persian army, emboldened by their success at Thermopylae, marched through Boeotia, where they sacked and set ablaze the cities of Plataea and Thespiae, cities that had defiantly refused to submit. The Persian forces then proceeded to Athens, which they found completely deserted. They then put it to the sword and the torch, razing it, fulfilling their punitive objectives. As the Persians continued to advance, the Greeks fortified the Isthmus of Corinth, destroying the sole road through it and erecting a defensive wall, effectively sealing off the Peloponnese. The strategic situation at the Isthmus mirrored that of Thermopylae, requiring a strong naval presence to prevent Persian forces from circumventing the barrier by sea. Under the advice and urging of Themistocles, the Greeks sought not merely to block the Persian advance, but to completely annihilate their naval strength. By cunningly drawing the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis, the Greeks managed a decisive victory that significantly weakened the Persian naval capabilities. Fearing a potential Greek assault on the bridges across the Hellespont, which would trap his forces in Europe, Xerxes had no choice. He retreated back to Asia with much of his army, though this retreat was marred by severe losses due to starvation and disease. He left behind his general, Mardonius with a select force to complete the subjugation of Greece. However, under Athenian instigation, the Greek coalition mobilized once more, confronting Mardonius in Boeotia, culminating in the decisive Battle of Plataea, where the Greeks achieved a significant victory, effectively ending the Persian invasion. Simultaneously, at the Battle of Mycale, the Greeks dealt further blows to the remnants of the Persian fleet, diminishing any remaining threats of another invasion. Well, despite being a tactical defeat, the Battle of Thermopylae gained an immortal legacy, one that still 2,500 years later we're still talking about. It's become emblematic of heroic resistance over overwhelming odds. While it was a strategic victory for the Persians in that they overcame the pass, the spirited Greek defense showcased their resolve and tactical prowess, turning the fallen defenders, especially Leonidas and the Spartans, into martyrs whose legacy would inspire subsequent generations. The battle underscored the effectiveness of Greek military tactics and the strategic use of terrain, contributing to a broader narrative that shaped Western perceptions of freedom against tyranny, a narrative that continues to resonate in contemporary culture. Thus, we reference the solemn plaque engraved at the site of the battle, still there to this day, attributed to Simonides, with the inscription, "O stranger, tell the Lacedaemonians that here we lie, obedient to their words." And with that, we reach the end of my little video on the Battle of Thermopylae and the brave 300s. Well, I'd first like to thank my top-tier patrons, Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey and Susan, for supporting the channel. As always, it's greatly appreciated. And I would like to thank you. If you've made it this far, then that is certainly showing that you've learned something. I'm sure you have. And I enjoyed it. So there's that too. Well, everybody, I will of course see you here tomorrow, same time, same place, for another thrilling tale. Perhaps a frightening one, perhaps an inspiring one, or perhaps just another very, very long video about some figure or event from our past. It's a past that we all share. It's a past that we all should understand. And of course, history marches on. And perhaps I'll be making a video about the events going on in the world right now within a few months once everything calms down. Let us hope that these events all come to a peaceful conclusion. Good night, everyone. See you next time.